It doesn't seem like today there are a lot of things that a broad spectrum of Americans would agree on, but I think this one might be the point of agreement we can find. There's a huge void of mature leadership in this country on a number of different levels. And so I'm excited on today's conversation of the Big Impact to be able to welcome in a guest who specializes in the matters of, the issues of, the topics of leadership. His name is Jeff Hancher, and he joins us from just outside of Pittsburgh. Jeff, how are you?
I am well. So good to be on the show. It's a privilege to be on and have some time with the listeners. As you said, man, there is a lot going on in the world today, and it has kept me busy as a leadership consultant, a developer of leaders, working through some of the change and adversities that have been 2020, no doubt about it.
There have been so many times, Jeff, where I have talked to my television and it doesn't answer me back, but I've talked to it anyways. That's
of course
one of my issues, I guess, where I have just been looking at whoever's this featured story, and it really isn't related to a political party as much as just the general malaise of our nation right now. And I've said to my TV, would somebody just make sense? Would somebody please step up and do something like an adult instead of like a child? Because all of us adults out here are waiting for somebody to lead. And as a guy who has centralized your profession in encouraging and training leadership, I have to think you've talked to the TV a couple times as well.
No doubt about it. Probably more in the last 2 months than ever in my life.
Well, what I want to do in the moments ahead is dig into some leadership concepts and help our listeners to maybe pick up on some things that we wish other people did more effectively, but that we ourselves should be practicing more effectively. But I think it helps also to dig into some of the background story, the backstory behind our guest. And I was reading on your website, thechampionforum.com, a little bit of the story of Jeff Hancher. I mean, it's not every day you read a sentence like, I was the child of two parents who were never able to work a single day of my life. Wow. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that. Can you take us inside young Jeff?
Yeah, it was quite a journey. It was one of those, Bill, that you didn't know how bad it was until you broke out of it. And at a very young age, the age of 12, my mom was diagnosed with a disease called lupus, an autoimmune disease. And my father, at the age of 10, was diagnosed with chronic osteoarthritis. And so how these two found each other is beyond me. I think it was a misery loves company situation. Nonetheless, they found each other, and they had two children, me and my older brother. And that led them to a very difficult life. My mom and dad were both in and out of hospitals my entire life. They battled. My mom literally battled for her life from the time I was born. In and out of surgeries, in and out of having some organs removed, portions of stomach removed. Both of my parents were amputees due to infections. So I spent the majority of my life in a hospital. I knew where every snack station was, where the free juice was, you name it. Thankfully for people that stood in the gap and made deposits in my life that helped me break out of that. But it was a very, very tough go. And me and my brother, our best hope living here in southwestern Pennsylvania was to get a good job in a steel mill or a coal mine and make a good run of it. And little did I know that the world had much more to offer for me and what God had called me to do and the opportunities that would be presented to me to kind of break out of that mold, which quite frankly, Bill, is not an easy one to break out of. But that's what I do for a living now. I want to spend the rest of my life helping a young Jeff Hancher see that the dream can be big and how to obtain it and help everyone reach their potential in this life.
And man, for anybody who has spent more than 2 hours in a hospital waiting for a test result or waiting for a loved one to come out of anesthesia, from surgery, it's a miserable place to hang out. That's not a slam on those who work there. It's just not a place where you want to schedule a vacation. And as a young kid, and I'm thinking you're young enough that this was probably prior to having tablets and devices in your hands, so it's just flat out boring. And
Right.
I would also think that you're left alone with a fair amount of your own uh, fearful thoughts. You know, this is mom and dad. This is a big deal. Were you scared back then?
Yeah, it was very scary. Matter of fact, there's a picture that I post in one of my keynotes, and it's a picture of my mom who's grossly swollen. And it was one of the many times, Bill, that we were told by our grandmother that your mom's probably not going to live much longer. And this picture literally says 1,000 words. And it's a picture of this woman with two young boys wrapped around her arms, with tears streaming down her face. And you can see the picture of me staring up into my mom's eyes, concerned, the look of concern, the look of fear, to your point. And there were many times that I was faced with that. One of the most vivid memories that I've chosen to let drive me is a memory of being in the welfare office when I was in third grade with my father, and him petitioning the state one more time for food stamps. We were one of those victims of circumstance where, you made $400 more from the state than you could get the $4,000 of food stamps. And here's a guy that's desperate to help his two young children and literally a dying wife provide for them any way that he can. And boom, he's denied one more time. Petitions, you see this, your dad's your rock, regardless of, his situation. Dad's Superman. And I saw Superman crumble before my eyes. And what started as depression and sadness ended up in anger. And I remember being whisked away by a caseworker as the police entered the building. And that has stayed with me to this day. And I will tell you this, Bill, to your point of fear, a lot of times, and even now I talk to people a lot about this, we get to choose what we do with adversity. And yes, there was a lot of fear growing up, constantly fearful of losing a parent. And in my mom's case, I was constantly fearful of her having a seizure when I was home alone with her. If you've ever been around somebody that has a seizure, it's traumatic for anybody. But I remember even as an 8, 9-year-old boy needing to learn how to hold my mom and depress her tongue, and the look that somebody has. So yes, those things I struggled with growing up. And even to this day, I have memories of those. But it's not until we pivot and reframe what's going on that we can literally allow adversity be our fuel.
Well, the reframing of traumatic moments is so vital, but it doesn't happen often enough. And so you end up with a generation, perhaps, of victims who have allowed themselves, I don't know if that's a fair way to put it, but who have certainly not moved past those difficult moments. And so to this day, they still wonder who's going to come along and take care of this, that, or the other. It's so encouraging to hear you talk about how you had people come along who would invest a little bit at a time into what they saw was a frightened young boy, so that fear wouldn't dominate every part of young Jeff Hancher's life. Who were those people? Were they relatives? Were they church friends? Were they neighbors? Was it all of the above?
It was all the above. I remember so many times my mom came from siblings of 11. And so I remember so many times they would come and, they would, give us school clothes, different things like that. I remember people that stepped in, as a Christian man, I don't believe that anything happens by chance. And I tell the story as part of my testimony often. Now, my parents were God-fearing people, but they weren't serving God. And there's a difference. We believed in it, but we weren't church-going people. But thank God for a praying grandmother that stood in the gap. And, I remember even growing up in grade school, I would spend a lot of time with my grandmother on my mom's side because parents in and out of hospitals, so on and so forth. It was just a burden. And so I spent a lot of time with her, and she would always take me to VBS, Vacation Bible Schools, in the summertime and take me to Sunday school. And there was a lady by the name of Mrs. Seto who really took me under her wing and, taught me principles and would call me often to check in on me. And that stood with me. Those seeds that were planted stood with me when I got older. I remember in 5th grade, Mrs. Seaman, she was in a church close by our grade school. And she held something at that church called Bible Release. And really, you had two options. You could stay back in the classroom and read, which I wasn't very good at, or you could go to Bible Release with Mrs. Seaman and eat cookies and learn a little bit about the Word of God. Ironically, both of those ladies ended up at the church I attend today. And I tell the story a lot about what we do matters. Each one can reach one. And I often think about those seeds that they planted in my life. And then fast forward into the military and into corporate America, people that took what they saw potential in somebody and said, man, I want to be a part of this. I see effort, I see gifts, and they could help draw those things out. And that's why I'm so passionate about leadership, Bill, and so passionate about helping to draw out potential in others. Because if it wasn't for people like Mrs. Seto, Mrs. Seaman, and many people along the way, the story of success I have today, it just simply doesn't exist. And now I'll dedicate my life to doing that for others.
That's powerful stuff. And it also reminds me that none of those people that you mentioned, not one of them, did what they did for notoriety or fame.
Right.
Nobody listening to us or watching the video conversation that we're having has ever heard of Mrs. Seto or Mrs. Seaman. They've never heard of them unless you link them into the conversation.
Right.
And yet, from the heart of a servant, the heart of a servant leader, they took it upon themselves to make a difference. I try not to be too overbearingly obvious in some of the lessons that I hope the big impact delivers, but I'm going to be overbearingly obvious with this one. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, whatever's happening in your life, you have the opportunity to positively impact someone else.
That's right.
Period. I mean, you don't know how hard things are. I understand. People have difficult situations. You can still help somebody else. You can do something. It doesn't have to be writing a check. It could be listening to their conversation. It could be using their name in a sentence because nobody thinks they have enough value to call them by name. Try that at your local rescue mission sometime. Just ask somebody what their name is, and they'll be amazed that you even asked. Every person has the opportunity to impact someone else for the better or for worse. You could do it the opposite way and really deliver some harm. Those ladies could have crushed a young Jeff had they, for some reason, chose to do so.
No doubt about it. And there's many stories like that. I remember in second grade, a random Santa Claus showing up to our house. And, as a child, you're anticipating Christmas and you're used to presents being under the tree. Well, there wasn't any this year. And a Santa Claus showed up on Christmas Eve. And I remember seeing my parents get very emotional. What I didn't know and my brother didn't know at the time was there were no real presents to be had. And this random rogue Santa Claus shows up. Now, what I think is that it's Santa Claus. But my parents knew different. And then when I got older, I knew different. And I knew, once I knew the story behind Santa Claus, I knew somebody somewhere saw a need and filled that need. Those are the kind of things that shape people. Those are the kind of things that I don't forget. And I know there's other Jeff Hanchers out there. And whether you, to your point, Bill, whether you ever get the spotlight or not, everything that we do to make a big impact into somebody can have a big difference in how they live their life and how they pivot or reframe maybe a tough situation. We have the opportunity to do that.
Our guest here on The Big Impact is Jeff Hancher. His website is thechampionforum.com. And for those of you listening to us on the radio, maybe you just tuned in a little bit late into the conversation as Jeff was sharing the challenges that he had in growing up. And at some point after serving in the United States Army, Jeff, you kind of began this journey into the corporate world, of course. You got to get a job, you got to work, you got to earn a living. And at some point, some light bulb went off in your brain that said, there's more to it than this. There's more to it than punching the clock or selling the widgets or whatever it is that the corporation was doing. When did you start to examine, even from 30,000 feet away, the leadership vacuum that you knew needed to be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, it was a journey, and that's a great word for it. I went to the military. I'd love to tell you I went to the military because I was full of patriotism and there was a need to serve my country. Now, that was a part of it. It wasn't the reason. I was running from something, not to something, and there's a difference between those two things. I needed to break out. I didn't have a lot of supervision. I didn't have a lot of direction as a teenage boy. I was hanging out with the wrong people. I was in the wrong crowd. I was getting in trouble with the law and you name it. And so I went to the military, knew I would get a GI Bill, knew that my only ticket to college, I was destined to be the first person in my lineage to get a college degree. And when I get out, I'm 2-3 weeks away from starting, and I got the call that I'd gotten so many times. Jeff, they're sending mom home in hospice. This is a call from my dad. The difference was he had to have his leg amputated and he needed help. Well, during this time, I just answer a newspaper article. I'm showing my age there, for a job that was a blue collar job with route delivery on a truck. And when I got into this company, a Fortune 500 company, basically as a blue collar entry level worker, Bill, I was making waves. I mean, I actually bought a new vehicle that had never been done before. And so I thought that I had arrived, but I kept seeing these other people within the organization and how they acted, how they presented themselves. And I started getting drawn to leaders because of leaders that I had. And I knew that what drew me to leadership is the influence that you can have in leadership. I saw what leadership did in my life, whether it was in the military or my humble beginnings in the Fortune 500 space, how some leaders came and started developing me. And I thought, man, this is amazing. Now, with leadership also comes the ability to earn wealth if you do it well. But you also get the ability to create playbooks, create innovation, create change, be a visionary. The passion in me wasn't a problem. It was knowing where the opportunities were. I had no direction. I didn't know that this world even existed. And when I started to taste it and I started to see that, man, this might be something I could do, that's when I really started chasing after it, because I knew, man, if I can get the leadership, if I can get the opportunity to lead, man, I can make big impact. And my advice to people that might be in the boat that I was in, that how it organically happened to me was, and this is my advice, start acting now like the person you want to become. That's what I did. I didn't have the title. I didn't have the corner office, but I wanted to make impact. Never seek leadership because of the title or the wealth. Seek leadership to make a difference. And that's when the platforms present themselves to you.
Now, should I be picturing Jeff Hancher as Michael J. Fox in Family Ties, where you carried a briefcase to school with you and dressed in a coat and tie every day?
Something like that. Image is important. And there's no doubt about it that I think whatever that means, I think you got to look the part. But yeah, I always tried to be my best, not only in how I carried myself, but in how I looked as well.
When you start to have these thoughts that there's more to it than the current job that I'm doing, and a lot of people have those thoughts. I've had conversations with people who for 20 plus years have done the very same job and are not very happy in doing it. Some are, but many are not, because they keep pointing out, they keep observing things that this company could do better. Ways they could save money, ways they could be more productive, ways that the list goes on. And every single time I have said to that person, so what are you going to do about it? The answer is, what are you going to do? It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. Mm-hmm. What would Jeff Hancher say in answer to the, well, what are you going to do response?
Yeah, I think, from a leadership perspective, and I think this is where we are right now as well. And whether you have a title or not, everybody's responsible for influence. Maybe you're not taking that responsibility, but everybody has the ability to influence. And much, much more, it's a call to action if you are in leadership. And so I would tell you, really, there's three things. Whether you're in leadership or not, there's three things that will help you carry influence. And I would say even more so if you do have the title. The first thing is change management. Everybody that is going to help with innovation, that is going to be anticipatory, they have to be thinking about change. Change is inevitable for growth. Change is inevitable for influence. We as leaders have to be change managers. It's not just the changes that are forced upon us, but more importantly, how we adapt to the changes and what type of agility do we have. Change management always starts with leadership. And if we were to sit down with 100 leaders over coffee, Bill, and say, how has the change been over the last 9 months? I'll tell you this, it's been vast. And, we can't wait for change. We have to create culture that people adapt to change. And we have to be taking time outs to be thinking about what's around the bend that we can't see, what's around that bend in the road. Change management is about communicating well and anticipating what's coming. The second thing is you have to be decisive. When change happens, when people are running really, really fast, as leaders, sometimes we have a lot coming at us. And right now, I would tell you in this season that we've been in 2020, the leaders, my clients, the businesses that I do consulting for, the ones that are thriving are the ones that are decisive, the leaders that are decisive. And sometimes you're going to have to work with what you have. It's not always going to be an ideal scenario. And there's been plenty of complex issues. There's a constant stream of new information that we have to digest and we have to react to. But at some point, as a leader, you have to be decisive. Not to bring up the elephant in the room, but think no further than masks. I mean, there's so much debate, especially think about in March of 2020, if you're a business leader, what social distancing meant, what masks meant. They said to wear an N95, then they said a cloth covering. I'm not here to debate masks, and I'm not here to tell you to wear one or not to wear one, but here's what I will tell you. The story has changed along the way. And so as leaders, you have to take the information that you have, but at some point you have to be decisive. And that would lead me to number 3, which is foresight. Foresight it's not about necessarily predicting the future, but it's an important skill that helps leaders manage and leverage the constant change around us. And we can't do this alone. We have to get good people around us, whether that is doing, the SWOT analysis of what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to getting a team around you that can help challenge your thinking as a leader. We don't have all the answers. And finally, when leaders decide on courses of action, they have to articulate the rationale behind these actions, because no news is it's often perceived as bad news. And so those are 3 things that I would tell you, Bill, that great leaders are doing right now that I've experienced. They're managing change, they're being decisive, and they have tremendous foresight.
We are visiting with Jeff Hancher on The Big Impact. His website is thechampionforum.com. And by the way, I'm thinking Jeff would gladly accept an invitation from your business or your group to come and speak or connect virtually or however we're able to do it these days. It's a tough day to be an on-the-road kind of a speaker because not many gatherings are happening that way. But innovation does allow us to do some things that we couldn't have done a couple of years ago. So there is an upside to that. You were mentioning, Jeff, right before the break, the importance of a leader effectively communicating the rationale behind a decision, behind change, behind a policy, whatever it happens to be. I'm glad you said that because I really think that, and my observations have been that that's one of the most surprising voids for me to witness in our culture today is the inability of people in positions of authority just to communicate effectively and honestly and not to play games. And so a couple of days ago, I was filling in on a talk show locally. The veteran host was off, so they asked me to come in. I took calls. It was the day after our state went into another lockdown, and our governor had a press conference on a Sunday evening. And I'll try not to editorialize here too much. I wasn't very pleased with the way the information was presented because it treated us all like we were in 4th grade. And a caller called in and said, "Oh yeah, well, what would you do?" And I said, "Actually, I've been giving that a lot of thought. And it's not necessarily the policy that was announced that was sticking in my craw, it was the way that it was announced. And I also pointed some fingers at the other side of the political aisle and said, there's no way on earth a representative from the other party should not have been in that press conference with the, since it affects all of us. And if you want to make some inroads in delivering your message, if you really believe in your message, if you really believe in it, then why not bring in somebody who doesn't necessarily agree? And
right.
I think we would probably call that bipartisanship, which we don't have anymore in America.
Right.
But that's my long-winded way of leading into this question. When you are dealing with corporate America and you're talking leadership, and you have that CEO or that COO or just a department head who has closed off the conversation from those who have a different opinion, what does that do to the energy of the team or of the administration or of the country, and whatever the fallout is, from that leader to close off opposing voices? Healthy or not healthy?
Very unhealthy. And, whether you're in a startup business or you're running a state or a country for that matter, we need to value people's opinions. Now, that's not to say that you're going to do everything that everybody says, but I will tell you this, the answer never comes from the corner office. Rarely does it come from the corner office. It comes from seeking and creating cultures that we value and welcome, and most importantly, seek feedback from others. Right now, in the day of social media, I find that people value attention more than they value respect. And attention is the currency of the day at times, Bill. And as leaders, we have to make sure that we understand, if we truly care about our organizations, our states, governors, politicians, whatever it is that you're doing, if you truly care about the cause of leadership, great leaders, they are way more concerned about what is right versus who is right. And there's a big difference between those two things. Great leaders, they're okay being wrong. They're okay if they don't have all the answers. And we have to seek out this information. We need to have good people around us challenging the status quo. We have to have, this spirit of what I call positive discontent that says we're not as good as we could be. And we have to get people around us, because you've heard the saying, Bill, that if you want something different, you have to do something different. If you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always had. But right now, especially in this political climate that we're in, not to make this a political discussion, but what I'll tell you this is, people are way more concerned about who's right than what's right. They just want to be right. Leaders, you have to understand that if you truly care about the mission, if you truly care about people, which at the end of the day, leadership is about influence, and it's about helping people get to their fullest potential. In return, your organizations thrive. If we truly mean business as a leader, we don't care who's right. We care what's right. And that is the culture that we have to create. And that takes us out of it, and it puts the team into it. The greatest answers and the greatest innovation will come by communicating and receiving information in. If we're not doing this as leaders, it's going to be a very short walk.
That's very well said. And I remember now, I'm flashing back to 25-ish years ago, maybe even further. The memory gets a little fuzzy at this point. I was working at a television station, and it was time for my annual review. And I went into the general manager's office for this conversation. And in the end, he offered me a jaw-dropping 1.5% increase in my pay, which was already like minimum wage at that point. And I said I was really hoping that we might do a little bit better than that. I had come in with a plan for, I think maybe the outlandishness of a 5% raise or something like that. I don't even know. And he said to me, "Hey, just so you know, I didn't even get my bonus this year." And I was stunned for a moment. And then I said, at any point when you'd like to trade paychecks, why don't we go ahead and do that?
Right on.
And as you were sharing there a moment ago, I was flashing back to that moment, because there can be a disconnection of context where someone in a position of leadership can forget the actual life position of the person with whom they're talking, and can shut down all the channels of communication with one stupid statement like that.
Absolutely.
I mean, the context matters, the situation matters, and a leader, by the way, would never use as some sort of leverage any what perceived difficulty or slight in his or her own life. They would never do that. They would simply say, I know where you are. Let's work together to get you to where you want to be. That's leadership. Not,
that's right.
I didn't get mine either. So even though I'm making 40 times what you are.
Exactly. Yeah, there has to be a voice of reason there somewhere. It's, we had a saying in the military, and I'm sure you've heard it, Bill, that leaders eat last. And, that's a great example of that. Like, as the employee, what, do you want me to feel bad because you didn't get your bonus? Like, this is never about you. The day that you took on the role as leader, that was the same day that you said, it's not about me anymore. Leaders are here to serve. And if you're chasing the wealth and you're chasing the money and the title and the benefits and all of this stuff, I can promise you your leadership effectiveness is going to be compromised. True leaders, great leaders, they go chase the opportunity to make a difference. That leader that you had that day, Bill, that's not what he intended to do.
No, he did not. And I guess in that sense, he accomplished whatever it was he intended to do, because right. I walked out of there ready to not ever have a conversation with him again, which might very well have been the goal. I don't really know. Jeff, as we kind of move towards our last couple of minutes, I know that one of the things that you enjoy doing is one-on-one coaching. I like that application during this era of not being able to get together in groups of whatever, name the number, because it's changing every day. So what does one-on-one coaching look like these days? I know, because I do some of it, that there is an almost endless list of people who are, I'm not going to say unhappy, but unsettled in what they do and in where they are in life. And it's so powerful when someone like that reaches out and says, I could just use some wisdom and some guidance. What does that coaching look like in your world?
Yeah, I think it's critical. We've heard many successful people tell us that, you're the sum of the 5 people that you hang around. Get around people that have been where you want to go. These are principles of success that you just can't be denied. And it's really a matter of what are you willing to invest in? Warren Buffett says it all the time, that the best investment, people ask him, what's the best investment right now, Warren? Everybody wants to know. And his answer is always the same. The best investment is in you. The best investment is in yourself. If I were to poll 100 people and say, is success important to you? 100 people would say yes, most likely. But the question then becomes, so what are you doing about it? As it relates specifically to leadership, or business in general, leadership in its essence is much better caught than it is taught. I'll give you an example. You can't pick up a golf book if you know the sport well, Bill. You can't pick up a book on how to golf well and then go play with Tiger. It just doesn't work that way. Leadership's the same way. You can't just go pick up a John Maxwell book and now you're ready to run an organization. You're ready to make big inroads into people. You need to get around it, see it, observe it, have somebody teach you the way, observe you doing it, and then give you feedback and direction. And oftentimes where I spend a lot of my time is with the executive leader. We've heard the saying, it gets lonely at the top. That can be very true. Complaints never go down. Should never go down. They always go up. And the higher you get, the less people you have to talk to. Nobody ever said of a great leader, man, they get rattled easily. What coaching does is it helps somebody be that sounding board, that voice of reason. Who's challenging you? Who's holding you accountable? If you're high in the org chart, probably not a lot of people. That's where somebody like me comes in. I love the opportunity to challenge the status quo, to kind of disrupt a leader or an entrepreneur's current process and challenge them in new ways of thinking, challenge them in breaking out to innovate, or sometimes it's terminations or adding people, whatever those things might be. It helps give a different lens to the business and the leadership growth. And I offer that on a one-on-one level, and we also offer that in group settings as well.
Every week, most every week on this program, I invite our audience to send in suggestions for guests that we should have on, that they've been inspired by, and stories that I've otherwise would not have come across. And that's how you and I connected. A listener said, "I love your show. You need to have Jeff Hancher on." And I sure am glad that that's happened, man. It's been a pleasure to kind of pick your brain and learn some of your passion and the inspiration for what you came through as a child and still holding on to the faith that sustains through all of this. It's very powerful stuff. My hope is that our audience will visit thechampionforum.com for more information on Jeff and all the different coaching and leadership opportunities that he offers. And as you, Jeff, as we now kind of work our way through whatever's left of this pandemic season, we all hope that it's not very much. I hope one of these days you and I can get together sometime and compare notes.
I would love the opportunity, Bill. And, I would say as a closing word to your listener, specifically that one out there that's, looking to continue to pursue, or that young person, three things that I would challenge them with, if I may, is be accountable, always improve, and engage your motivation. That person that messaged you, Bill, and said, "Man, you should have Jeff on the show." This is somebody that I've shared these principles with. When I get asked so many times, well, how did you go from a life of poverty to where you've become? Accountability. I tell people all the time, Bill, you're going to sit in one of four camps in life. Camp one is, I hope it doesn't come up. Camp two is, if it comes up, I'll wing it. Camp three is, if it comes up, I'm ready to talk about it. But then there's camp four. If it doesn't come up, I'm bringing it up. People that live in camp four, they have the ability to make big differences. People are magnetized to people that have answers. If you knew CPR and saw somebody on the floor, you would chase them because you had an answer to their biggest problem. That's where we got to be to win. And continuous improvement, we can't just say we want it and do nothing about it. We've got to be getting better. I used to box, and my trainer used to always say, we sweat in the gym so we don't bleed in the ring. And we have to be willing to sacrifice what we want now for what we want most. Most people aren't, but you have to always be improving if you really, truly believe in driving success. And then engage your motivation. I told you the story about being in the welfare office. Many times when I've wanted to quit, I've thought about that scenario. And I swore I was never going back, and my family would never experience anything like that. Are you letting your adversity be an anchor, or are you letting it propel you? So I would tell the listener those three things as we close out this segment, Bill. And it's been awesome to be on, and an awesome opportunity to be in your network.